Welcome to a series of reflections focused on a spiritual issue of universal significance. Because it is universal, it is common to all religious and spiritual traditions of the world. More than that, it is fundamental to the human condition. If you are human, you cannot but go through this experience, you cannot escape it, and therefore, it makes sense for all of us, irrespective of religious, cultural, class backgrounds, to be clear about this fundamental issue, about which unfortunately there is a lack of clarity. And because there is lack of clarity, there is weakness in conviction, and therefore very unfortunate consequences follow. I am here referring to the universal human experience of being tempted, temptations. To be tempted is to be human. All human beings are vulnerable to temptations. They are exposed to temptations. Temptations cannot be escaped. They are vulnerable to temptation. All of us are. And temptations constitute a series of setbacks which make us go back in our journey of life, and the journey of life is assumed to be the journey towards perfection, higher and higher stages of perfection, just as in the physical dimension we were once children, babies, infants, then became children, then young adults. So all along there was an improvement in our physical, intellectual abilities. We were moving towards physical perfection, even though we were not aware of it. It would have helped had we been aware of the fact that we are involved in this process of seeking physical, intellectual perfection, because if we were aware, we would have done a much better job of it. I can say this to be true about myself. Most of our time, much of our life, we are actually groping in the dark. That indicates a failure of community. It's the duty of a community to be a source of wisdom to the people who presumably belong to it. Unfortunately, the community is a kind of vague, ineffectual concept. It doesn't seem to make any practical difference. However, when anything that presumably pertains to a faith community is involved, a great deal of zeal is exhibited. Especially this is true in relation to what is presumed to be external threat. But once that is over, it's business as usual, and everything relapses into this vague, uncertain, nebulous kind of state. Therefore, nobody really knows what one is supposed to practice, what really are the practical aspects of the spiritual tradition one is required to practice. And I hope that this reflection, this maybe a couple of videos, not more than that, would help everyone, irrespective of religious backgrounds, as I said, to become a little more aware of this very unfortunate, fruitless, futile state, and enable us to move to a better, higher, more effective, more spiritually fruitful condition of life, which then will ensure that our life becomes happy, joyful, and fruitful, and we become a blessing, a source of encouragement, empowerment to others as well. And we have a great sense of fulfillment, and nothing in the world, no other achievement in the world, I believe ardently, can compare with this. So that's the reason why we are undertaking this reflection. The purpose of this reflection is to attain greater clarity about a pattern or an issue or an experience that no human being can escape, and an experience through which our humanity is continuously defined and redefined, either to our benefit or to our detriment. So it's an experience of serious consequences, and therefore it makes sense that we become clear about it. So this is the overall purpose. Temptations. To be human is to be tempted. There are two reasons why human beings, unlike animals, are open to temptations. First is, human beings have a far greater degree of moral freedom. Those who have studied animal behavior, and I'm not one among them, I've only read what others have found out through experiments in animal behavior and behavioral psychology, particularly focused on animal behavior. I'm deriving this insight from them. They testify that animals have no moral freedom. That is to say, every animal is conditioned by its instinct, and its actions and reactions are dictated entirely by its instincts. Whereas human beings have the ability to act instincts innate in us. For example, all moral decisions involve acting against or acting on a plane higher than natural instincts. For example, if I decide to forego a meal in order to feed a starving neighbor, I am rising above my natural instinct of looking after myself in order to look after the needs of somebody else. So that's where the moral space is created, when we rise above our instinctual conditioning. Now, no animal is capable of it, though of course you would find the mother lion feeding the cubs and the cow giving milk to its calf. All that's true, but it will not be extended to another person, even in the same clan, much less to another animal belonging to another genus. Okay, so that is one aspect, namely human beings, unlike animals, have moral freedom, freedom of choice, and because choice always involves at least two possibilities, without choice cannot be exercised. We have a tendency to take the path that's harmful to us. That is why both psychologists and anthropologists have studied this particular streak in human nature. And here let me refer to a very interesting book by the American author Eric Fromm, Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, where he investigates this theme in a very, very interesting and well-researched manner, why it is that human beings act very often, more often than not, act in a self-destructive way. That is to say, in ways that prove harmful to them. If you give them two options, one that would be beneficial, the other that would be harmful, a majority of people would choose the harmful way. Jesus was very well aware of this more than 1900 years before this book was written. So in the 7th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, verses 13 and 14, he says, there are two ways, the broad way and the narrow way. The broad way leads to everlasting damnation, and a majority of people take that path. In fact, that's a path of self-destruction, self-corruption, which earns them only everlasting damnation. But there is a narrow way which leads to eternal life, and very few people take it. So this awareness exists in all religious traditions, in all cultures. It is not something peculiar to Jesus, peculiar to the biblical tradition. It is part of the universal human condition. And therefore, every human being needs to sit up and take note of this pattern, that there is in our nature a tendency towards self-desecration, self-corruption, self-destruction. And that is real because we have freedom of choice. If we didn't have freedom of choice, we couldn't have chosen the path of self-destruction. This doesn't mean that freedom of choice is a bad thing. What it means is that freedom of choice has to be used with great discernment, responsibility, and wisdom. We'll come back to it in the course of our further discussions. The second important aspect of temptations is that we are connected to the external world from where temptations come, or the stimulant to be tempted, or stimulants of temptations come. And we not only have the ability to connect to the world through our five senses. These five senses are the five windows always open on the external world, because our life involves a continuous, unremitting negotiation with the external world. So through these five senses, we are continuously ingesting or taking in external impressions. But that's not the only faculty given to us. We are given a corresponding and extremely important faculty. That's the faculty of reason. You can call it also judgment, or in the religious language, sometimes it's called discernment. Now, the function of reason, the function of discernment, the function of true judgment is to assess these external impressions. These are extremely important words, two important words, please note them down. External impressions. Because all the time, our inner life is impacted by external impressions via our own senses. So there is the world of external impressions, there is our inner life, in between are our senses, the five senses through which we connect to the external world, and these five senses accept external impressions. They are then processed by our capacity for reason. So reasoning is a filter, reasoning is a filtering process through which we make the difference between beneficial impressions and harmful impressions. And moral choice means that which is harmful to our humanity, our dignity, our inner felicity, our peace, that which is harmful is rejected. And that which is nourishing, beneficial, healthy, helpful to our personality, our true self, is accepted. So that's a process of judgment, reason, wisdom. So if you just accept all the external impressions without discrimination, without subjecting them to the scrutiny of reason, then you become chaotic in your life and you will become a person without any inner substance. You are like the dry wind that is blown hither and thither by every wind that blows. And that denotes a complete deficiency of personality, which reflects poorly on the person concerned. So I have so far mentioned two aspects which are very central to the understanding of this universal experience of being tempted. One is moral choice, which gives us the freedom to choose between options. Secondly, we also have reason that enables us to make this moral choice, or a series of moral choices based on sound assessment of the external impressions that fall upon us via our senses. And all our temptations are born out of the interface between us, the self, and these external impressions. And therefore, the all important question is there a filtering mechanism between the world of external impressions and our internal life, so that only that which is necessary and beneficial is allowed to come in, and that which is unnecessary and harmful is rejected at the threshold itself? It's a legal expression, a case being rejected at the threshold itself. Don't consider it any further. And Jesus has a very interesting teaching which is not understood by Christians, where he says, if your right hand offends you, cut it off. It's better that you enter heaven without a hand. If your right eye offends you, pluck it out. It's better that you enter heaven without one eye. Now, the meaning is not that you should go on cutting off your limbs or plucking your eyes, gouging out your eyes. The meaning is that you should deal with these harmful temptations, harmful impressions and sensations right at the threshold. If you allow them and say, oh, I will deal with it later, they will overpower you and you will be enslaved. That's how you become the slave of your own senses, the slave of your own passions. So that's the idea of dealing with these impressions at the threshold itself. So I hope this much is clear. We have to be clear at every stage, otherwise we will not be able to understand our theme. Though our theme is familiar, its actual implications are very unfamiliar. Therefore, I will proceed very slowly. I will repeat myself deliberately so that the threads of thought are maintained in connection, in mutual connection, which is necessary to attain clarity. So now let's proceed to the next stage of understanding. I said a short while ago that all the temptations that we experience pertain to external impressions and how we process them and then react to them. And it is for this reason that every spiritual tradition, without exception, urges us to attain mastery over our senses, which is put very simply as attain mastery over the self, self-mastery, self-control, which is an important aspect in the Greek context of self-understanding. Apollo, the Greek god of light, had only one major dictum, one major piece of advice: know thyself. Just 2 words. All of philosophy actually originates in this. I would say all of religion originates in this one issue. Do we understand ourselves? The most basic duty that every human being who values himself or herself, respects himself or herself, who wants to take care of oneself, the basic and indeed the foremost duty, I would say the only duty, all other things will take care of themselves, is the Apollonian dictum or the advice of Apollo, the Greek god: know thyself. And all of the Bible, from my point of view, addresses this one question: who are you? And Jesus answers that question by saying, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world, you are the leaven in the lump, you are the children of God, you are, you are, you are. These statements are made in response to the human need to understand oneself, because we behave according as we understand ourselves. If, for example, I believe that though I don't have a crown, I am a king in my mind, I behave accordingly. I will not cheapen myself. If I believe that I have personal dignity and I have a unique personality, I will not behave like third-rate characters. On the other hand, if I believe that I am only a stomach, I will only live to eat and not eat to live. My entire personality gets reduced to a stomach. And therefore, the synecdoche is a figure of speech in which a person is reduced to a part of his being. So he is a big stomach, we would say. He is a big stomach, or he is a loud mouth, meaning the only relevant part of his personality is his mouth. The only relevant part of his personality is his stomach. There is nothing more to him than his stomach. Now, that's the worst condemnation that can be issued on a human beings. I hope it doesn't happen to any one of us. So, it's very important for everyone to attain clarity on this issue. So, impressions. Every religion, every spiritual tradition, if not religion, every religious scripture, one way or another, enjoins on us, exhorts human beings to attain self-mastery. Now, the question arises as to what the self-mastery means. How can we master ourselves? We can understand somebody overpowering us, somebody stronger than us, overpowering us. How can I master myself? How can I get out of myself, wrestle with myself, and then overcome me? Is it possible? Yes, even though the Bible does not give a proper answer to it, I have to say here that you can get excellent help from Stoic philosophy. So in this video, I'm going to draw some material from Stoic philosophy in addition to spiritual literature available to us. So it will be something of an eclectic approach, a multi-dimensional, multifaceted approach, but I'll make it as simple as I can so that we don't end up confused. Now, let me very clearly state the 4 stages that Stoic philosophy prescribes in dealing with temptations. Very easy, extremely easy, but you have to remember this. Stoic philosophy would say that temptation means 4 things are involved, or in encountering or overcoming temptations, think of these 4 dimensions. First of all, there are these external impressions. And the crucial thing is how you respond to these external impressions. For example, a man sees a woman standing there, as King David did, when he was on the terrace of his palace, he saw a beautiful woman having a bath and he fell for it. External impression. Okay, so all our temptations arise or come from external impressions. So Stoic philosophy is absolutely right in saying that we have to mind what sort of impact and impression external sense impressions have on us. And we must therefore develop a strategy to deal with these external impressions, and uh, these strategies comprise the next 3 steps in Stoic philosophy. The first is become aware of the fact that all our temptations arise from the way we relate to external impressions. Second, therefore, there is a need to judge these external impressions in an adequate, truthful manner, and the only faculty given to us is reason. So, Stoic philosophy actually gives to reason the place of God. I'm not saying that Stoic philosophy does not believe in God. Stoic philosophers were deep believers in God. In fact, Stoic philosophers, at least Epictetus, certainly believed that the very purpose of life is to follow God. That's how he put it, follow God. Okay? So nobody can accuse Stoic philosophers of being atheists or agnostics. They believed in God. They in fact gave central position to God, but they did not do so to the extent of exonerating individuals of their personal responsibilities concerning their well-being, their duty to take care of themselves. So the first thing to do, according to Stoic philosophy, is use your reason to judge these external impressions and decide for yourself truthfully whether or not these impressions will lead you to the path of life or the path of destruction. That's the second thing they would say is, that's where religiosity comes. Stoic philosophers would say, offer a sacrifice to your God. Why is that helpful? Because by offering a sacrifice, what you are doing is, the only way in which this rite helps is you become then aware of something far nobler, far higher than you. That enables you to be strong against these external impressions and hold your ground. So this offering that you make to God, the sacrifice that you offer to God, is not favored unto God. It is a help that you do to yourself, according to Stoic philosophy. So that is the second step. First step is judge your impressions aright. Second, offer a sacrifice to God. Third, connect to your own pure self. Here, of course, Stoic philosophy connects directly to Hindu philosophy, according to which human nature has 2 dimensions, Alpatman and Mahatman. Alpatman constitutes the low self, comprising all the instincts and impulses that that humanity is heir to on the lower level, which has all kinds of unfortunate manifestations. Mahatman, Mahatma Gandhi, one who lived in terms of the higher, nobler impulses, instincts, goals, ideals, purposes of life. So the Stoic philosopher would say, when you feel tempted, when these external impressions impact you in a certain manner and you feel vulnerable to them, first thing is offer a sacrifice to God. But that's not enough. Then, having done that, you then compose yourself, try and connect to your pure self. That is already within you. It's a resource that you can draw on you. Just as God, who is external to you, according to Stoic philosophy, Jesus Christ will redefine the relationship between God and us and say that God is also within you, the kingdom of God. So there is an external resource you can draw from, which is God, to offer a sacrifice to God, and therefore you draw your strength in order to master yourself from that external source. But that's not the only source available to you. You also have an inner resource, which is your own pure self, your own Mahatma, your own noble self. There is that beautiful thing within you. This is something that Jesus denoted in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5 verses 14 to 16, where he says, no one lights a lamp and puts it under a bushel, but upon the candlestand, that it may give light to all in the house. That is to say, every human being has this lamp which is capable of shedding light all uh, uh, o- uh, 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 around and within his own inner life, but also all around him. It can fill his own inner life with light, can also shed light around. So that is a resource which is already within us. But unfortunately, in the beautiful image of Jesus Christ, people are keeping this hidden under a bushel so that this light cannot find expression, because our low self, our Alpatman is riding over, is controlling, is oppressing our Mahatman, our noble self. So, the Stoic philosopher would say, try and connect to your pure self, your noble self, your Mahatman, because you are also that Mahatman, Tattvamasi, that thou art. What is it that thou art? You are also that divine element. That is Hindu philosophy. See how Hindu philosophy connects to Stoic philosophy, how that connects to the spiritual vision of Jesus Christ. When Jesus was tempted, what did he do? He did exactly the same thing. He remembered God. When Satan tempted Jesus to turn stones into loaves of bread, he said, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from God. God, he was remembering God, right? And when he say man, he's trying to connect the best self to himself. I mean, Satan was trying to tempt Jesus into believing at that point in time that he was no more than a stomach. Because if a man has fasted 40 days and 40 nights, all of his personality, his self perception, his self understanding will get reduced to just one limb, one organ, not limb, one organ, which is a stomach. So the only relevant thing to his stomach is the stone there. And had Jesus succumbed to the temptation of transforming stones into loaves of bread and eating it, Jesus would have lived for the rest of his life only as a cosmic stomach. He would have forgotten everything else. That would have been the end of his spiritual mission. It is the subject, the theme that we are discussing is as profound, as serious as that. It makes all the difference between life and death, and therefore I presume, I sincerely believe that you are interested in this topic. So, the Stoic philosopher would first say, use your reason and judge these external impressions. Number two, offer a sacrifice to God so that you lift you out of yourself, connect to something beyond you out there. Third, connect to something nobler within yourself, the Mahatman, that light which Jesus talks about, which is also within you. Draw from that. Connect to your own better, pure, noble self. And third, the Stoic philosopher would say, seek morally healthy company, which in the Christian context becomes, or the religious context in general becomes, the community of believers. What is the idea? What is the use? What is the need for a community of believers? It is to provide this kind of moral matrix, moral framework within which the individual who faces temptations in life finds empowerment. We have many religious communities, but I dare say there isn't a single religious community which discharges this function in relation to the individual believer. Therefore, from this point of view, from the point of view of providing the moral support necessary for individuals who find themselves often in life in situations of vulnerability, precariousness, weakness, debility, there is no religious community. The moral connection between the individual and the so-called religious community to which he belongs is completely severed. It doesn't exist. And therefore, from my point of view, frankly, I have to say, a religious community doesn't exist. It may exist on paper, but it doesn't exist experientially. If you try to fall back on a community in order to derive empowerment from it in times of your temptation, your weakness, your difficulty, your bewilderment, you will come a cropper. Then you will realize the truth of what I am saying. So this is the four-pronged approach of the Stoic philosopher, extremely easy to remember. I read it a long time ago. It remained clearly etched in my mind. That is why I'm very, very confident that you don't have to make a special effort to understand or to remember it forever, because it is so practical. So connected to the reality of life. It's not some kind of vague, outlandish, esoteric theory. It is down to earth practical stuff. So let me summarize what I have said so far. Human beings are tempted, necessarily tempted. No human being is exempted from this experience of temptation. Therefore, being tempted is a universal human condition. Then I said that there are two reasons why human beings are tempted, unlike animals. One, we have a capacity to make moral choices, and choice involves having more than one option. And therefore, unfortunately, for some strange reason, that strange reason is explained in two different ways by two different religious traditions. Christianity explains this in terms of the doctrine of the original sin, and Hinduism explains this in terms of the doctrine of karma and rebirth. Both are attempts to explain this particular streak in the human nature, and therefore this paradox in the human condition. So, the capacity to make moral choices. Second, a capacity to interpret the external impressions that fall upon us all the time, which, if we don't succeed in interpreting it right, then we succumb to these temptations in an unhealthy manner, which makes us predisposed towards individual corruption and degradation and death, complete destruction of our own personality and life, which is a great tragedy. So then I tried to introduce you to the four strategies that the Stoic philosophers suggested in order to deal with the situation. That is, the deal with the practical need to judge external impressions aright. Failure of which leads to unfortunate choices which result in serious consequences to the human being concerned. These are: judge your external impressions, the external impressions that your five senses gather from the world around you all the time. Judge them aright, and you're given a faculty for doing so, that is reason. Subject these external impressions to the scrutiny of reason and be merciless in doing so. Be clinical. The second thing you have to do is offer a sacrifice to God so that you are, through that process, connected to something higher and beyond you, from which wisdom can be derived. And in every spiritual tradition, it is assumed that God is the fountainhead of wisdom, and therefore it helps to connect to God in situations of temptation. The third thing that the Stoic philosophers said is connect to your own pure self, which is an inner resource already available to you. The fourth thing is seek the company of those who are morally wholesome, and that company can strengthen you further in remaining in a healthy state of self-mastery, mastery of your own senses, mastery of how you interpret the external impressions that you harvest through your senses, and how you process that within and arrive at your life responses and strategies, etc., as a consequence of which your personality will be in a process of continuous refinement and incremental enhancement, ennoblement. So, when temptations come, you can have two consequences. One is either you get corrupted and degraded, or you're refined and ennobled and empowered. And I find the four pieces of advice provided by Stoic philosophers are very pragmatic, and if you follow them, you will be able to attain a fair degree of success in this regard. I notice that the time is already 34 minutes, so obviously I can't continue any further with my thought. I'll do a second video as a follow-up on this, and I hope to conclude our reflections on temptations and the strategy to master them so as to develop a healthy, dynamic and joyful personality, a subject in which everyone, irrespective of whatever differences there might be, would be very keenly interested. Thank you for your generous and very encouraging participation and your solidarity with this mission to reinforce our humanity, and to pray that India will be filled with the light of noble humanity. Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. Ah, beautiful. Jai Hind.